Hello, and welcome to this recorded program on ablation biophysics. I'm William Sauer. I'm the section chief for the cardiac arrhythmia service at Brigham and Women's Hospital. With me today is Dr. Andre Davila. Andre, he's the director of electrophysiology over at Beth Israel Medical Center. And I also have with us Lori Foley. She's the manager and director of the Translational Discovery Laboratory, where we are today, here at Harvard Medical School.
Can't wait to do this. We're going to compare the classic STSF RF delivered and lesion formation, compare that with the new QDOT, and hopefully we are going to understand the differences between the two systems a little bit better, and hopefully going to enjoy.
All right, so let's get started. All right, so this is going to be a 10-watt lesion, and we've actually closed the stopcock to the irrigation, so it's not going to be irrigated. And you'll see some of the limitations that we have.
Impedance is 120.
Oh yeah, went down. So you can see now the temperature is rising. We get a warning, and then it cuts off. So we were only able to, what was that, 5 seconds? Yeah. We were only able to deliver 10 watts, which is nothing. We're not going to get a big lesion. But let's see what we do when we turn irrigation on. So I'm going to program this up to, let's just do the 10 watts and we'll see the difference. So we'll go on here. And now our temperature, we don't get a warning. It's at 22 degrees. And actually we can go, so we've already gone longer at 10 watts. We can actually go to 20. And we can actually go to 30. So that greatly enhances our ability to deliver an ablation lesion using irrigation. Now, this is an artificial scenario, and we don't have circulating blood flow, which that passive cooling allows us typically to deliver 30 watts and not be limited to 10. But in this exaggerated example, we can see that we're delivering energy because of irrigation. All right? Let's talk a little bit about irrigation and what's optimal and whether or not there's a downside to irrigation when delivering lesions. I think that the upside is clear. You're able to deliver the power. But there might be some circumstances where we have a different shaped lesion if there's a lot of irrigation with endocardial sparing, kind of like a teardrop. And maybe we want a shallow lesion. So how do we adjust irrigation for that?
It's just important to understand that for the same amount of energy, irrigation may result in a smaller lesion. Typically, as we said, we irrigate and then we get larger lesions because doing so, we're going to be able to deliver more power. But for a given amount of energy, if you take the same amount of joules over time, if you irrigate, the lesion will be not so wide. And on the other hand, if you irrigate too much, you can have a little bit of sparing, endocardial sparing, which I'm not sure if it's clinically meaningful, because at the end of the day, you are bleeding in a large area, but you can clearly see in animal models that if you irrigate too fast, you just preserve a little bit of the tissue that's touching the tip of the catheter, which results, therefore, in a smaller lesion.
So what we're going to do is I'm going to deliver 30 watts for 10 seconds and do 6 lesions, point by point. And I'm going to compare that to 30 watts delivered over 60 seconds, where I have a continuous motion in a line that covers the same exact distance. All right, go ahead and deliver 30 watts for 10 seconds. All right. And then give me the distance in between these 2 points. Let's go on here then.
30,
10. Okay, let's do it again. On. Okay, so I'm going to span the same distance, and I'm going to start from roughly around the same spot. And this time I'm going to try to do a continuous motion. So
you gotta go 60 seconds.
30 watts for 60 seconds. Yep. Thank you. So right now we can see the surface here. You can see on this, we'll call this medial and this lateral. The medial point by point, you can see there's little indentations here. And the question is, you know, there might be sparing here. There might be conduction through this here. And you can see that the contiguous lesion, there's nothing in between. So I think already continuous motion is actually giving us a better lesion. Let's try to explain to people why we were able to get a deeper lesion with the contiguous lesions.
It's very simple. If I am delivering one lesion here, and then I stop for 10 seconds and deliver the next one here, I give enough time for the tissue to cool down again, which will increase the impedance, and therefore the lesion here will have a higher impedance and a lower current. When I drag, is the opposite. As I don't stop, I go from a warm area to a not so warm and not so cold. My current here, it's always higher than the point by point. So what happens typically if you look at the data there, here, most of the lesions were delivered with a very consistent 520 milliamps, and here was just 535. And this difference between dragging between hot and warm, hot and warm, hot and warm, gives me a better biophysics for the lesion to be more consistent. Clinically speaking, it's harder to do dragging than point by point, but it's just for us to understand the basic principle of radiofrequency ablation.
We touched upon something that I think is important for mid-myocardial circuits and VT, and that is this concept of warming the tissue before delivering energy and getting a better lesion that way. And sometimes we can get a deep lesion by giving a low power for a long duration. And a lot of people think, let's turn it up to 50 watts because I know that that's deep. But that could be a mistake, because you're delivering a lot of power, desiccating tissue, and maybe impeding your ability to deliver further power.
And also, don't forget that if you're talking about VT, you're talking about a tissue with areas of scar. A scar, by definition, has a very important impedance mismatch. If you're delivering current here, the current will flow to areas with lower impedance, which in other words will mean current will go to areas of scar and not necessarily where the live tissue is. So you need to give enough time for the resistive heating grow, and most of the conductive heating cause damage to the target that you're trying to ablate.
Let's talk about the opposite, shallow lesions. We're on the posterior wall, and everything we just said here about conductive heating, trying to get deep, we don't want that on the posterior wall. And I like high power, short duration because I want to capitalize on that resistive heating. I want a shallow lesion, and I want to sort of just get that resistive heating right at the surface, and I don't want to heat the esophagus. So it's the exact opposite of the long, low power, low duration, long duration lesion.
Exactly. The conductive heating is a function of your resistive heating halo. The temperature and the time that temperature stays there. If you go for a short application, it will be short, therefore the amount of conductive heating, which always happens, will be less than when you do this for the ventricle, where you're going to have, at the end, your lesion, your atrial lesion, will have a less contribution of your conductive heating as compared to the ventricle, where the conductive heating is supposed to have a much more important contribution for your entire lesion.
All right, why don't we talk a little bit about safety? At this point, we haven't spoken much about steam pops. And I think that one of the important aspects of radiofrequency ablation is the ability to safely deliver the RF energy without achieving a steam pop, without getting a steam pop. Maybe we explain a little bit about what a steam pop is, and what we can do to prevent it.
So basically, what happens during the steam pops, like any other material in nature, you can heat material to the point that you can melt it. But if the heating happens too quickly, the expansion of the material can actually result in an explosion. And that's exactly what happens to the cardiac tissue if you're delivering too much power over a short period of time, and that specific amount of tissue cannot accommodate for the amount of energy that is being delivered, the expansion will happen too quickly, resulting in explosion there. And that's why we have to deliver energy in a way that will prevent that from happening.
So it's the accumulation of heat with the conductive heating over 100 degrees for the phase change, and we get that explosion. Let's go ahead and show a demonstration. So we'll do 50 watts for 60 seconds, and let's see if we can get a steam pop. Now notice I'll go ahead and put the force higher. A higher force can increase the risk of steam pop because we're compressing the tissue and we're able to deliver that heat deeper and more effectively. So why don't we go on at 50 watts? You can see the impedance continuing to drop here, and we can see that we have a good lesion here. Oh, there we go.
Pop at 45.
Oh. All right, we can come off now. So you can see that we had impedance dropping while we were delivering energy at around 40, what does that say, 40? 50 seconds. Around 50 seconds, you can see that little spike. Now, what's been happening is as the impedance drops, we're actually delivering more and more current, and there's heat accumulating deeper. When you see that spike, it's over. The pop already happened, and a lot of times we see that spike and we scream off, 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 but the damage has been done. Now, thankfully, most steam pops from endocardial ablations will pop inside the heart, but in those devastating steam pops where it pops on the other side, that can be a big hole that requires surgical intervention. So we do everything we can to prevent steam pops. This is a transmural lesion here. This goes all the way down. And we have contraction band necrosis, that's that black line right here, and we have heating of the tissue, that's this white area, and then you can see the disrupted architecture of the tissue in this here, that's the steam pop. And like I said, it blew on the inside of the heart, at least in this ex vivo example. It didn't go to the other side. So, ways to avoid steam pops clinically. If I see a marked reduction in impedance immediately, if I see increasing temperatures late during the burn, and if I see the impedance level flattening and I'm not trying to get a deeper burn, I'll go ahead and come off prematurely, and I often use those measurements to help me. Using ice can also help. You can see the lesion get white hot, typically right before a steam pop. What else can we do?
No, that's pretty much the same, what all we have, but it's interesting because now that you are burning AFib with shorter lesions, it's became very unusual to see pops during AFib ablation.
Yes, it's true, because they're shorter,
very
high
much
power.
shorter. Yeah. It's also a function of time, no?
All right, let's get to the QDOT. So, Andre, we've just gone over the SF, the role of irrigation, force, power, duration, overlapping lesions. We're going to use the QDOT micro. Now, this is a new catheter that is on the SF platform in the sense that we still have that same external irrigation throughout the electrode. However, we also have microelectrodes at the very tip, and then we have 6 thermocouples, 3 at the tip, 3 in the base, that allows us to see localized temperature through this bullseye format on the CARDO system. So I think it addresses a couple of issues that the SF didn't. One is the microelectrodes detecting small channels in VT, for example, or in a atypical flutter. There could be an advantage. The temperature feedback is accurate, and it allows us to maybe see warning signs of of a steam pop, or maybe allows us to titrate our power in different ways. And then finally, the QDOT micro with the NGen allows us to alter the irrigation from 4 to 15 depending on whatever we set our target temperature to. So it's an advance. One of the coolest features, and that is this 90 watt 4-second lesion. We were just talking about the high power short duration. Well, this is very high power for a very short duration, 360 joules of energy, and it really capitalizes on that resistive heating. Since I've been using this catheter, I've been using those settings for the posterior wall to try to prevent esophageal injury. All right, Andre, so we have our QDOT catheter, and I think I want to start out just by leveraging this high power short duration concept. We talked a little bit earlier about resistive heating, and what we can do with this catheter is deliver 90 watts over 4 seconds. And so let me do that, and I'm going to actually alter force and see the differences. With resistive heating, the force is not quite as important as with conductive heating when you compress the tissue and have that heat go deeper into the tissue. So I'm going to just do light force 90 watts. We talked a little bit about the placement of the electrodes, and it looks like we have a temperature of 27 degrees in here, and the bullseye, you can see there's a top, a bottom, left and right, and that corresponds with the catheter. The outside is the outer, and the inside of that bullseye is at the tip. So, for example, you'll see the whole thing get red, and that shows us the temperature there at the tip. Light force. Okay, 90 watts on here, please. Okay, and we could see that light force there. You can see right here, Andre, there's clearly a surface lesion there, and it's going to be shallow. Now, for comparison, we'll do 20 watts for 18 seconds right next to it, okay? Same force. Same amount of energy. Yep. All right, now if we look side by side, you can see there's a massive difference. You can see the surface here. That had there's almost no surface lesion with 20 watts, same exact amount of energy. And think about all the years that we were giving 20 watts for 20 seconds and 20 watts for 30 seconds to try to avoid esophageal injury. It's almost like this backwards paradox. It's higher power, shorter duration. All right, so let's do another 90 watt lesion, and I'm going to have slightly higher force, and we'll just remember that. Okay, let's go on. Okay, and you can see again we have that same resistive heating circle right here. Give me, we're going to do 90 watts right in a row overlap now. All right, 90 watts. Okay, let's have a look at those 90 watt lesions and the 20 watt lesion and see what we've learned. Here we have 90 watts low force, 20 watts low force that you can't see anything on the surface. It's like nothing, but similar energy. And then 90 watt high force, then 90 watt stacked lesions, okay? So you can see here the 20 watt lesion for 18 seconds, I don't see anything.
There's nothing there.
There's nothing. And then the 90 watt low force is here and high force is here, similar depth. There's a coronary artery there. So let's notice this depth. It is shallow, right? And you can actually see it on the surface here. Now let's go ahead and let's see this experiment where we stack the lesions. And this is where I think it's important, because what you had said before about this tissue priming and the hotter tissue, you can get a deeper lesion that way. And that's the opposite of what we want when we're using this on the posterior wall. We don't want a deeper lesion. And look at that, look how much deeper it is.
Much deeper.
Much deeper. So the lesson I learned with this is that I don't want to stack the 90-watt lesions on top of each other. And if you notice, it almost looks like a mega lesion where the highest depth is in the middle in lesion 2.
Mm-hmm. When they overlap.
Yeah, exactly, where the overlap is. So what I usually do on the posterior wall is I actually skip lesions on purpose because I want to have lesions like this depth, and I just want to have shallow lesions across. When you stack lesions, that's when you increase your risk for esophageal injury. Now that the QDOT's out, I'm using 90 watts for 4 seconds. One of the things I've noticed is that sometimes I'll go on and then there'll be esophageal heating. You can see the temperature rise. I'll come off and then the temperature continues to rise. And I think that gets to that convective heating we were talking about earlier, and a lot of operators get very concerned that somehow we're delivering more energy. Have you seen latency, that heat latency in the esophagus before?
If there is heating, there is conductive heating. It's impossible to prevent conductive heating. And as we saw here when you're demonstrating the lesion, those lesions were pretty impressive. Those lesions will hit the esophagus at some point, and that's why I think it's so important what you're saying, that you have to space out the lesions there. It's not simply because it's a short lesion that you can deliver lesions on top of each other, because you're going to stock heat and you may cause some esophageal problems there.
Yeah, I think you're going to get into trouble if you're overlapping lesions one right after another, especially with that high power, because high power short duration stacked lesions is actually high power long duration sort of distally to that. So I think that it's using these high power short durations, we have to have consistent contact. You just don't have the margin of error that you do when you're lower power, and you have to be careful about those lesions.
At the end of the day, we're all delivering around the 360 joules on the posterior wall in a way or another. The damage, if the lesions are similar, the damage will have to be similar as well. So there is no magic number there.
Yeah, that's a good point. We balance safety and efficacy all the time. Let's do a 90-second high power. Let's try to get this. I'm going to be in a fatty area here. The impedance might be different.
It's in 108.
50 watts? 50 watts, and let's go ahead and try it. I'll try to maintain it around 70 grams of force.
90 seconds.
Yep, 90 seconds, 50 watts. This is a regular Q mode 50 watts. I'm just seeing whether or not, and see the temperature went up here. You can see it get bright red. It's 50 watts now, but when the temperature gets high, popped. I felt it. All right, we did it. All right, so it's harder, but it's possible. So how far in were we there? That step up, that's the pop. It was a small pop, but still.
20 seconds.
Okay. And then the power was still 50 there, and the temperature was what?
Oh, was max was 50.
Yeah, that's right. So let's go ahead and do the same settings, except this time, 50 watts, 90 seconds. This time, let's go ahead and put the nominal settings for temperature target at 45, cut off at 55. So when we put the temperature up to 50, we were able to get a steam pop. Let's see if we're able to get a steam pop at 45. Yep. All right, we have a dip in power now. So based on the tip tissue interface temperature of 45 degrees, we're now down to 36, 35 watts. Now you're right, I mean, we're not getting a bigger lesion here, but the safety is enhanced because of it. So I think the lesson here is if you want a deeper lesion and risk steam pop, you can alter that number. If you want to maximize safety, you reduce that target temperature.
Yeah, but safety comes first, right? I think if we improve safety here, it's a very important feature of the catheter.
I do want to mention a little bit about impedance.
The impedances here, they have been just in range, There's nothing different.
Well, we've got the salt here. I think that the important aspect here is that the NGen measures impedance at 480 kilohertz, and the SmartAblate measures it at 45 kilohertz. And I think that I learned a little bit about impedance. I always thought of it as, V equals IR in terms of resistance. But impedance is different than resistance because it has what's called a reactance, which is also measured in impedance. And reactance is dependent upon frequency. The higher the frequency, the lower the measured impedance will be because of that reactance component. So what we need to do is just recognize that if you're aiming for a target impedance, or if you're concerned about patch placement because the impedance is a little lower on the NGen, you just have to recognize that the reported impedance is slightly lower than the reported impedance that we used to see with the SmartAblate.
Because the impedance is lower, the impedance drop will be less dramatic. The impedance drop is a function of the initial impedance, so it would be a mistake to titrate your power just looking at your impedance drop. Because with a lower impedance, your current will be higher, your lesion will be much better. So don't look at impedance drop alone. You have to put it all together. Impedance is dependent on so many variables, right? That's why it's difficult to use the impedance drop itself as the only surrogate for quality of the lesion. You change rooms, you change patient to patient, you change the location of a different electrode, and the same impedance drop will have a completely different meaning to on your next patient.
All right, well, that's a wrap. I want to thank our viewers for bearing with us and letting us show you a little bit about ablation biophysics. Any parting remarks?
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you, BioSense, for all the support. I hope you guys enjoy it.